So, welcome everybody to Harvard Extension School's Creative Writing and Literature Student Club. I'm Carly Ray, the president of the Creative Writing and Literature Student Club, and this is Inkspires Author Series, where we host debut and best-selling authors. Today we have the author of We Hit Turbulence and the publicist at Harper Collins, Jessica Cozzi. Now, according to Jessica's website, she crafts sweet, swoon-worthy romance stories for teens to show that there is always love in this world if you're willing to find it. Through the stories she puts on bookstore shelves, she gives readers the chance to flip through the pages, fall in love, and find their inner hopeless romantic. So welcome, Jessica. We are so excited to have you on Inkspires. Tell us where you're joining us from.
Hi, thank you for having me. I am currently on Long Island in New York, so not too far from you guys.
Yeah. Well, congrats on your debut novel, We Heard Turbulence. Tell us more about this young adult swoon-worthy rom-com.
Awesome. So We've Hit Turbulence is a young adult romance where our protagonist, Olive, is in a relationship that's long distance and a little bit rocky. So she decides to fly across the country to go visit her boyfriend and try to sort some things out from their issues they're having. And he lives in Hawaii, so she's flying cross country. And on the flight, she winds up sitting next to Tyler, who is her ex that she never truly got over. So it is very much as forced proximity as you can get, pretty much being stuck on a plane, second chance romance, and it's kind of like just a fun adventure travel romance.
Yeah. Now, can readers expect a cliffhanger when the rom-com ends, meaning could there potentially be a second book?
I think I wrapped up the story enough that it can end where it did, but I did leave the door open in a sense that if we did decide to go back to Olive and Tyler's world one day, it definitely is possible. I didn't close it off, but I did finish the story. As of right now, there's not like any planned sort of second book, but the opportunity is definitely there. If you finish the book, you'll understand.
Mhm. Well, what inspired you to write this YA rom-com?
So my brother actually lived in Hawaii for 5 years. He went to the University of Hawaii, where Jack goes in the book. And so I remember one time when we would go fly to visit him, it's about 13 hours from New York when you fly directly. And I remember thinking like I was sitting next to my sister on the plane, and I'm a very nervous flyer, very much like Olive. And I remember being like, thank God my seatmate is like my sister and somebody I know for such a long flight. I could lean on her to go to sleep, or it's not awkward, or it's not weird. And I kind of just was thinking, like, what could be more awkward than sitting next to someone you know? And then I'm like, well, it could be sitting next to a stranger. And then I was like, what could be worse than sitting next to a stranger? And then, like, what if it's somebody you know, but you really don't want to be sitting next to them for some reason? And it kind of just spiraled from there. I scribbled like the idea down on like a cocktail napkin on the plane, and then I think it sat in my backpack for like a year before I found it again and was like, oh right, that is a cool idea. I should play with that. So it definitely came from visiting my brother and those long flights and kind of just wondering how could this experience be worse than it already is to be going cross country on a flight. So
Yeah. Yeah. Now, is that how some of your ideas start? Is you kind of just start thinking, what if X, Y, and Z?
yes, I think for most of the books I've ever written or the ideas I've ever had is something like that. Like I wasn't sitting down with like my notebook being like, what's a good idea for a story? It's kind of just I've been out and about in my daily life and would have a little thought like, well, what if this happened? And then, as a writer, that happens to you very often. But not everyone becomes a book. And the way I can tell that it's meant to become a book is because I keep thinking about it. So instead of just thinking, oh, that would be awkward to sit next to your ex, I just like was obsessing over it the whole flight and like throughout the rest of the trip, I was like, what would they be doing if they were here, kind of thing. So it kind of just like flits through my brain and like I can tell it's a story when it sticks and like it's something I keep thinking about
Yeah.
every so often. And that's kind of where I know is my good jumping off point to start planning.
Yeah. Now, what was your favorite part of crafting the story?
I really loved, so in We've Hit Turbulence, Olive and Tyler are going through a bunch of different places in Hawaii, and a lot of the places they go to eat and the parks they go to and the experiences they do, they are not only all real places, but they are things I have done when I visited my brother, except the cliff jumping. He did that. I refuse to do that. Um, but most of these things that they're exploring during their big Hawaii adventure are things that I experienced personally. So it was really fun to go back and write about them and just I remember smiling so big, like writing these scenes and remembering what it was like to taste the loco moco or to stand at the top of the Diamond Head volcano and see those types of things. So it was fun to me to go back and relive all of those memories and look up YouTube videos and my old photos and kind of just get to relive it again a little bit.
Now, you said you read a lot of romance. So, how was picking a trope for this like rom-com? Like, did you know instantly a trope you wanted to use or
Yes, I love reading forced proximity. I think it adds something so much to the romance where it's like it's not that easy. Like, if you run into your ex at a bar, you can turn around and leave or go to a different bar or go to the other side of the room. When you're sitting in economy on a cross-country flight, you can't run from him. If he's sitting next to you and it's a sold-out flight, like you have no other option except to deal with it. And I feel like forced proximity in that sense really raises the stakes in a book because as people, like if you're embarrassed or you're scared, like we just kind of want to like turtle in on ourselves or leave or shy away from something. But when you're forced to be with the person that you're trying to avoid, it forces all these feelings to the surface that you've been trying to hide. Particularly in Olive's case, because this was a breakup that she never got over, and she tried to push it down, and now he's sitting right next to you. His arm is brushing you for 13 hours. You can't avoid it anymore. So I think forced proximity really raises those stakes and creates a really interesting dynamic when they're forced to face the things that they not necessarily want to.
now do you go about crafting the romance first when you were thinking through We Hit Turbulence? Did you
Mhm.
kind of start thinking about the threads of that?
Yeah, I think for me, the romance is pretty much like the first thing that comes to mind. But it gets fleshed out in subsequent planning. Like I knew I wanted Tyler to be her ex, and I knew I wanted them to have a messy past, but it couldn't be so messy, something like I'm not going to spoil, but I didn't want it to be something so terrible that happened between them that them getting back together the reader wouldn't root for. But I also didn't want it to be something so light and superficial that the reader would be like, well, why'd you break up in the first place? Like, this is stupid. I don't believe in it. So finding that balance was a little bit tricky. I did know I want them to be exes. I did know I want this to be a second chance romance, but like through subsequent planning and outlining is when I really started to flesh out the logistics of why they broke up, what happened, why they don't talk, but why is the door kind of still open that maybe one day they could get back together. Like it wasn't something so terrible and evil that getting back together would be something the reader wouldn't root for. So the romance comes first, but like in very vague ideas, and then I kind of flesh it out as I go.
Was there a rom-com that inspired this novel? You're kind of telling us about the comp, so can you share more about those?
That was it. The Unhoneymooners by Christina Lauren. I very much enjoy travel books where it's like set in a different place. A lot of people like reading books that are set in places like New York. And like I grew up here, so as much as I love New York, like it's not as exciting to me to read about a story that's going through Manhattan. I know Manhattan like the back of my hand. I'm there several hours a day. Um, but like reading something like where they're in Hawaii and it's so lush and different and exciting and so different from the way of life I'm used to. I really enjoy that. And Christina Lauren writes in Enemies to Lovers like I have never seen. They are brilliant, the two of them. So that was one that was really big. In terms of YA, I've always been a really big fan of Sarah Dessen. I'm so excited that she has a new book coming out this year. Sarah Dessen really, I feel like, has mastered the sweet YA romance where not everything has to be so big and splashy for it to be a great, important love for somebody. And like I really tried to marry those two ideas, like the fun and the excitement of like a Christina Lauren romance, but also like the really nuanced emotional depth of a Sarah Dessen YA romance. So those are two that have meant a lot to me.
Yeah, Sarah Dessen's The Rest of the Story was one of my favorites.
Oh,
Yeah.
that was a brilliant one. And she has a new one coming out this year, so very
Yeah.
exciting.
Yeah. Now, was it difficult to like, you talk about the 13-hour flight to Hawaii. Was it difficult to actually like, plot that and write out the chapters in the same setting?
Yes, it actually, this book I think went through like six different rounds of revisions before it even touched my editor's desk because I was trying to find the balance of, they're sitting next to each other on a plane and they can't go anywhere. And it ends up being an entire third of the book is where they're on the plane. But people don't want to read like 100 something pages of them just sitting next to each other talking on a plane. That's not very interesting. At least for me as a reader, I would not find that interesting. So it was very difficult to find the balance of while they're on the plane, this is where I kind of needed to explain their past, explain where they're going, why she's going to Hawaii, why she doesn't want to see him, why they broke up. There was a lot of like background details I had to get in this one part of the book, but I didn't want them to just sit and info dump. And also, it's not realistic. Like, if you sit next to your ex on the plane who knows your history, you're not going to start talking about like rehashing, oh, just so you know, this is how we broke up. Like, they don't need to know that. They lived it. So it was very difficult to kind of like flash back. And when I first wrote the book, it was all in present tense. There was no flashbacks. It was just kind of Olive sitting there thinking about her past. And then that didn't feel very authentic. So then I rewrote the entire book, doing like every chapter was like present, then past, then present, then past to kind of flesh things out that way. And then I actually submitted, when we started submitting to publishing houses, the editor at the time who was interested in the book, she said, have you considered condensing this into a single timeline instead of dual? And I was like, I actually started that way. So then I had to rewrite the book a third time because you can't just go back to a previous draft because, in rewrites, you start to add more things and flesh out more characters. So I rewrote it again in a single tense, yes, a single tense. And then when my editor acquired the book, a different editor, she said, this would be great if this book was a dual timeline. So I had to break it apart again. And I feel like we found a really good balance where instead of making each chapter like present, then past, and present, then past, I kind of slipped into moments of the past where it felt right, but not every other chapter. It was just kind of like when Olive was thinking about something was a good opportunity. So that took a lot of work, to go back and forth and find that pacing that was right. I think we did it probably, like I said, I think towards the end, it was about before the book went on sale. I think that part was fixed about 14 passes of having to tweak and change and play with that. And it's the butterfly effect of if I change something in this scene, all the scenes after it now have to reflect that change I made. So it was difficult. It was definitely very worthwhile. I'm glad I did it. I think the pace we settled on is perfect, but it took a lot of rewriting for sure.
We talk a lot about how the chapters now need to move faster, to
Mhm.
hold readers' attention. Did you take that under consideration when you're filtering in the past and
Yes, I am very much as a reader in like my own life, I like short chapters. I think it makes me more inclined, when it's like 2 a.m. and you're finishing a book and you're like, oh, just one more chapter. It's only like 5 pages, so I can do it. And then you do that over and over again, and then it's 6 a.m. I very much enjoy short chapters. I find, especially in romance, I find those fun and punchy and really sucks you in. And it's like a good breaking point. Like if you can only read for 20 minutes, you can probably read a chapter or two and right at the end of a chapter and like feel like you left off in a good place. So yeah, for me, that was something that I didn't want my chapters to be too long. There were several instances where I would zoom out on words so it shows you like every single page. And when I saw a chapter that was too long, I'd be like, this has to break somewhere. I have to figure out where I'm going to break it, and we're going to make it two, we're going to make it three. So for me, that was something that was important to me, especially in romance. I like the fun short chapters that feel like they fly by. I think that's a good experience for a romance book.
yeah. Now, who was the most fun character to craft and we hit turbulence?
Surprisingly, Olive's best friend Delia, she was somebody who did not exist in the first several drafts of the book, and then one of the drafts where I started going back into the past and the present, she kind of surfaced in one scene, and she was just going to kind of be like a throwaway character that appeared once or twice, and that was it. And I just found her so fun and snarky, and I found it so enjoyable to write that like when I finished that scene, I was like, I don't want to be done with her. Like I think she's got more here. So she ended up not only being in a few more scenes, but eventually becoming Olive and Tyler's best friend, which became relevant to the plot as she was someone they had like shared custody of during their breakup and how that made things tricky. So Delia I found was so fun. She's so different from who I am as a person, which I think is what made it fun to explore her. I'm definitely very Olive-esque with the planner and being afraid of flying and that kind of thing. But Delia was so different from who I am as a person that I found it really fun to be in her head.
Yeah. Now, who was the hardest character to craft as you were going through the 14 rounds of revision?
Probably Jack, Olive's boyfriend. Because similar to the thing I said about her and Tyler and their past needing to make sense, I think for Jack, I needed to have a reason for them to be on the rocks, but not so much of a reason that people right away wouldn't believe it's a love triangle. Because there did need to be that sense of conflict. Like if he was just a terrible guy and Tyler was just a 100% fantastic guy, there's no conflict at all. So I think for him it was difficult because he was the one who was like the antagonist of the story, but I still had to make him likable to a degree because you had to be a little more, Olive had to be a little more conflicted about her decision. So that was pretty difficult for me, because I didn't like him from the start because I'm Team Tyler, obviously. But I had to make him a little more likable, which was tricky.
Yeah. Now, what was like one of the most difficult craft elements you worked in? Was it like, working on setting, voice, the atmosphere?
I think pacing. Pacing has always been one of the hardest things for me as a writer. I feel like that's a pretty universal thing. Like in my MFA program, that was something a lot of people often talked about. Um, I think it's something that's not impossible, but it's very, for me, it's very difficult to get it right on the first try. Almost always I have to rewrite in some capacity to make the pacing of a book make sense, which we touched on with the timeline thing. I think for me that's always kind of the trickiest part because it's a balance that might make sense in the draft you're writing, and then in future drafts, when you change something, it might completely throw off the pacing, and you have to kind of rework that all over again. I feel like it's a very delicate balance, and so I find that tricky. It's not impossible, but it's definitely the trickiest part. Like I'm in revisions for my second book right now, and there's like this pacing thing I have to fix, and I'm just dreading it because I know once I fix it, I have to change like 20 chapters after it, and I'm just like, no, no, thank you.
Well, without giving away too many spoilers, what was your favorite scene to write? And we've hit turbulence.
The cliff jumping scene. That's the scene that I had the art commission for, that we have the art cards for. That was my favorite scene in the entire book. It was actually the scene I wrote first, which is it's right in the middle of the book. But it was the scene that called to me and the one that I felt like I was so excited to write. And I really, really enjoyed writing that one. I go back to look at it often. And it's work I'm very proud of. I liked that chapter.
Mhm. Now, was crafting the romance scenes difficult for you? Like, how did you go about it, and what advice do you give writers who are approaching romance scenes?
I don't think it was difficult because I am such a self-proclaimed rom-com junkie. Books, movies, plays, like I am very, very enmeshed in the world of romance. I would say advice for people that maybe are not as enmeshed is honestly reading and watching these rom-coms and watching these movies because, a romance, it is not a spoiler to say a romance ends in a happily ever after. It is the credence of the genre. It is the thing you are not allowed to deviate from. If you don't have happily ever after, it can be a fiction book with a romance element, but it cannot be categorized as a romance without a happy ending. That's how publishing works. So it's not a spoiler to say that happens. But if you know your character readers are going into it knowing there's going to be a happy ending, you have to make them work for it. You have to make them want to really be with them the whole way and like see the journey. And when things fall apart, because they often do in a romance before they come back together, you want them to still be rooting for the characters, and that's a very tricky line to walk. So I've rewatched like some of my favorite romances, reread some of my favorite romances to kind of just see how they balance that and how things can go great for a really long point of time and then they have to go a little bit south because that's where the drama comes. And then it goes back to being a happily ever after, and it's kind of finding that balance of, well, how much of the book should be things going well and how much of the book should be things going wrong without overwhelming the reader or boring the reader. So I would say definitely my biggest advice is research through reading and watching romances.
Mhm. Now, how do you as a writer go about getting to know your characters? Because, like, there are tropes in romance,
Yeah.
but you want to make it original in your writing. So, how do you go about that with the characters?
My MFA program, I did the Southern New Hampshire University MFA in creative writing and young adult literature. We had a class where we had to do a character sketch for some sort of homework assignment. And they gave us this template, and it was like a 3-page template of like, the standard things. What's your character's name? How old are they? What do they look like? Like all those basic things. But then there were very specific questions like, who would be the first person your character called if they needed to be bailed out of prison? Or like, what is their deepest fear? Like, what is their childhood nickname? Like things that you might not necessarily write into the story, but it helps you know the character very well. So I did that for the homework assignment, and I really liked it. So for all of the characters in Me for Turbulence, which I wrote after, so that was not even during this program. I just saved that template, and after that program, I used that same template for all the characters in Me for Turbulence and every book that I've written after. And I feel like it was really important to me because even if you're never gonna find out Olive's childhood nickname or the name of her first pet or like her first brush with like grief and death, like you don't need to necessarily know those things, but to me it helped me know her better to fill that questionnaire. So for me, I feel like that really helps me get in their head and kind of know them a little bit better. So when I start writing, I feel like I do know kind of where they're headed and the type of decisions they would make that would make sense for them.
Well, the cover of We Hit Turbulence is great. Were you involved
Thank
in
you.
the design?
I
And
was.
it's behind you
Yes,
too.
it's right here. It's also right here. I have the book right here. Um, I was not very helpful, I will say. Penguin Random House was really great that for the covers, you actually get to fill out this whole questionnaire that says, what are some other books that are published that you feel like has the type of vibe you're going for? Are there any physical attributes of your characters you want us to include? Are there any monuments or landmarks or like things you're specifically thinking of? And I was so unhelpful, and I basically said, I want it to be illustrated. I don't know what Olive and Tyler look like outside of my own head. Good luck. Like I was very much like very open of like I will take whatever you think is good and see. And when I got the first sketch of this book, which was not even colored in, I got the first sketch from the artist Mallory Heyer. And the minute I saw it, it was the craziest feeling in my life. I describe in the book that Olive has dark hair or Tyler has tattoos, but like I don't see them as people in that same way. Like I hate when people ask me like who would I like fan cast my book for because I don't know. I don't know. Like I don't see them as people in that same way. And so I think seeing that for the first time I was shocked because I was like somehow she reached in my head and like drew them. Like when I saw them I'm like that is what they look like. I would not have been able to articulate that to you when I filled out the questionnaire and then I saw them and I was like this is Olive and Tyler. This is where they belong. So I did fill out the questionnaire. I got to approve the sketches, and then when I saw the final cover, they're like, "Do you have any notes?" I'm like, "None at all." I was like, "I'm just crying like looking at this. Like it was beautiful. It's so bright. It's so fun. I feel like it very much like encapsulates what I'm going for of like the fun, bright travel romance where things are just silly and exciting and adventurous, and it's really beautiful.
Now you didn't want them doing the cliff jumping on the cover.
No, so I actually didn't even think of that. I think like for the cover, we didn't want to do that. We wanted to stick more to like the island and the Hawaii thing, but I had art commissioned from the same artist, Mallory Heyer. I commissioned her to do the cliff jumping scene, and it is on my Instagram, and I have like art prints of it, and I love it. I saw it and I was like, this is just like another version of my book, and it was really, really exciting to see but yeah, I think the cliff jumping is really good for like an art print and it's more of like a if you know you know kind of thing. But the cover I got very lucky. I'm very, very grateful.
Yeah. Now, how about the title? Is naming your novels ever tricky? Are they always changing?
So you know what's funny? I'm terrible at titles. So I usually when I'm drafting for myself and nobody else, I make a joke title just for myself. For a while this was Secret Plane Work in Progress. And then after a while as a joke, the Steve Aoki song Turbulence, I just named it We've Hit Turbulence as a joke. And somehow I forgot to remove that from the file before I sent it to my agents, who forgot to remove that to the file before we went out on submission and who forgot to remove it from the contract before it was signed. And I really loved it. I thought it was fun and silly, but I was like, there's no way they're gonna go for that. Like, I don't know. I just didn't think that it was gonna be the title the publisher wanted. And nobody has ever stopped me. And I kept saying to my agents every week, like, are we moving forward with this title? And then when I saw the cover, I was like, okay, I guess they are. Like, awesome. So
Yeah.
I kind of do it like as a joke. My second book, The Rom-Com Conundrum, was another one that I just started as a joke. I was like, oh, she's in love and she's having some problems, so we'll call it The Rom-Com Conundrum. And the editor was like, this is great. So I used to think I was terrible at titles, but apparently like my joke titles I make for myself stick. But yeah, so it started as something that was just for my own files for myself, and then nobody ever stopped me. So Weaver Turbulence is what it settled on.
Now, did you book a 13-hour flight to Hawaii as you were writing this? So you were like, let
You
me just
know,
experience this again.
I considered it. I did consider it. No, but I did not. But in the middle of writing it, my brother graduated college, so I did get to go back. So I didn't get to experience everything Olive and Tyler did again. I had done it in previous trips, but some of that stuff I kind of got to do again. And then one of my really good friends lives in Hawaii, and she's getting married in August in Hawaii. And I'm going to her wedding, and I'm like, this is gonna be great. I'm gonna write this off on my taxes as book research, like in book promo. So that's really fun. But no, I didn't like specifically book a trip for writing the book, but I was back there at one point because my brother conveniently, thank you to him, graduated college in the middle of me drafting this book.
But what is it you hope readers take away from We Hit Turbulence?
I hope they have fun. Like genuinely, I know that sounds like such a trite answer, but to me, I my favorite thing about a romance is just being like settling in and getting sucked into the story and just like smiling and laughing and finishing it and feeling like your heart is lighter. I want it to be a fun little escape and a journey for them, and that's my biggest goal. If people read it and they smile when they read that last page, I feel like I did my job.
Mhm. Yeah, I feel like when we were talking about the honeymooners, that was a book I laughed out loud, and that's what I was telling
Yeah,
everybody. You need to grab it.
some books, listen, like certain books are meant to be, thrillers are meant to shock you and horror is meant to scare you and like traditional literary fiction is meant to make you think and like romance can be all of those things too, but to me, the best part of a romance is the fun. It's just pure joy and I really, really enjoy that as a reader and as a writer. I smiled from ear to ear writing this entire book, even through the late nights and the million timeline changes and all those things that were frustrating. It felt exciting every day to open my computer and go back to this book. And I hope that that is reflected in the story.
Yeah. Well, you also have another novel that you touched upon that you're writing, the
Yes.
rom-com conundrum. Can you tell us more about it?
Yes. So it's coming out in fall 2027, also a Delacorte romance. And the rom-com conundrum is about a girl named Sasha who, for a school project, decides to write a romance screenplay. But the problem is she's never been in love. So she decides that's not a problem, and she'll just rewatch all of the 90s and 2000s rom-coms because they'll tell her everything she needs to know about love. And she decides to rent them from the library and do it the old school way, like to fully commit to it. And she ends up falling for a boy who works at the library, and she learns that real life is a lot messier than the movies. It's so fun. It's so much an ode to like I got to rewatch like all my favorite rom-coms, like 50 First Dates and How to Lose a Guy in 10 Days and Bridget Jones' Diary and all of those. I got to write off movie theater popcorn on my taxes this year. Um, so it was a lot of fun. That's very much like an ode to like rom-com movies.
Yeah. Now, before we switch to talking about your writing process and publishing, is there anything else you want to add about We Hit Turbulence?
Just that I hope that people that read it, like if you do enjoy it, like these places and these things that they do are real places. So if you do ever find yourself there, go to the Rainbow Drive-In. Go, you don't need to jump off China walls, but you can go look at them and like go do the mountain hike, go to the Hukilan Marketplace. Like these places are real, and I worked very hard to make them feel very vivid. So if it's something you find exciting and you are there, like I hope people know, like you can live Olive and Tyler's entire Hawaii adventure day on your own if you felt like you wanted to. So I hope people
I
do
feel
that.
like we need a map of that, Jessica.
Oh,
So if we
that's
are
a good
there.
idea, actually. I'm writing that down. That's a good idea. Also.
Well, let's talk about your writing process. Did you always want to be an author?
I did. I have been writing as long as I can remember, which I know a lot of people say, but one of my earliest memories, I think I was like 3 or 4 years old. I was very young, and my mom read me The Giving Tree, and I hated the ending of The Giving Tree. I thought it was really sad when the tree like gives all of herself away. And so I remember ripping out the back pages and trying to write my own ending. I didn't know how to write, to be clear. I was scribbling, but I thought I was writing. And I remember like getting lectured by my mom of like, we don't destroy books, we don't do this. And I remember being like, I'm not trying to ruin the book. I'm trying to make it better. Like I remember like, I'm trying to improve this. I was 3 years old. Like I don't know what I thought I was doing. But that was one of my earliest memories of like, I'm trying to make this better. And I've kind of just always been drawn to things since then. Like I've always been drawn to being a writer. It's always been a part of my DNA, and I feel like it was never like a dream of if I become a writer. It was just a when. I didn't know when, but I knew it was going to happen. I felt it from very early on.
Was that always the plan then to go into the MFA program?
Actually, it was not. So I knew I wanted to work in publishing since I was in middle school. I knew I wanted to be a book publicist. And so when I graduated undergraduate in 2020, so we know how that went for everybody involved. Um, and so I remember like before COVID hit, I was saying, I didn't know a lot about online grad schools. Nobody in my family had gone to graduate school. So what I was under the impression of was to get an MFA in New York, where I lived. I'd have to do night classes, and I wouldn't get home from Manhattan till like midnight because I lived 2 hours away from Manhattan. And if I'm working till 5 p.m. and then doing grad school till 7, like I wasn't going to be getting home till very late. So I always dreamed of getting an MFA, but I kind of had put that on the table off like kind of away because I was like, I want to work, I want to jump into publishing. I'm very excited about being a publicist, so I want to prioritize that. And then COVID hit and everyone was home and I had all the time in the world. And that's kind of when I explored online MFA programs. And that's kind of when I realized like this was a dream I thought I had to shelve, and I don't necessarily have to anymore because now we're home with nowhere to go. Publishing's in a hiring freeze, so I had no job. I had a degree, no job, and a lot of stress. So I was like, you know what? I'm just gonna like go back to my first love and explore writing. I feel like I'm not gonna ever get that chance again because the program was 2 years, and it was about a year and a half before publishers started hiring again. So I got to really throw myself into it full force, full time, which was not something that would have been an option for me if COVID hadn't happened.
Mhm.
So
Did you focus on romance writing in the MFA program?
my
Yeah.
my concentration was young adult romance. You get to the program was very tailored, so you get to pick. So it was my concentration specifically, my degree says young adult romance. So
Yeah.
very fun.
Um, yeah. So you mentioned being a publicist at Harper Collins. Can you share more about that process, like what it looks like and
I love
behind the
my
scenes?
job.
Yeah.
I love my job so much. I've been there 5 years this year, and it's a running joke at work that I still skip into the office. I love what I do. So a book publicist, the way I like to describe it to people is if you ever turn on the TV and Hoda Kotb's talking about a book, or you open the New York Times and there's a review of a book, or you hear an author interviewed on a podcast. That is the work of a publicist. So my job is to pitch media and influencers about the books we have coming out and convince them to read it, to review it, to feature it, to interview the author. So that's what I get to do for work. But I love working in PR because we like to say you never have the same day twice. There are some days where I'm sitting at my desk sending pitches. There are others where I'm in the green room at Good Morning America or at the Today Show, and while my author's being interviewed, I'm standing right behind the cameras. I get to organize book events. I get to go to Comic-Con for work. Like I get to do a lot of really fun things that I may not necessarily like. That's part of my job. Like I got paid to go to Comic-Con. Like I was gonna go anyway, and I just get to go and get paid for it. So I enjoy it because the job is very fun and creative, and you never have the same day twice, which keeps it interesting.
Mhm. Now you mentioned during COVID, they had a hiring freeze. So, was it after COVID that you went back into being a publicist?
Yes, I got hired November of 2021. So it was almost 2 full years of COVID. In between that, I worked as an administrative assistant for the Brooklyn Book Festival because I knew I wanted to work with books, but the publishers were not hiring. So I was like, I'm just going to do something with books in the meantime. So I ended up becoming an admin assistant for the Brooklyn Book Festival, and it ended up being the Hail Mary I did not know I needed because when an author gets booked for a festival, the publicist is the one who coordinates it. So I was being put in touch with all these major publicists from all these major houses when they're all like, because I was the one they contacted about the schedule and the panels and everything. And so I got to meet a lot of really, really great book publicists that I didn't know. And then when my time at the festival was coming to an end and like I wanted to start applying to publishing, a lot of them I had become pretty friendly with. And I emailed them and said, hey, like, I know you might not be able to get me a job, but do you have any leads? Do you have any recommendations? Can you look at my resume and see if I'm missing something you think I need? So I did a lot of networking that way. And I ended up getting my job at Harper Collins because of somebody I was connected to at the Brooklyn Book Festival had an opening and kept me in mind because I had reached out and networked with them. So it ended up being, at the time, it was just a job because I needed money and I needed something to do. And then I fell in love with the job and then I fell in love with the people and it got me the key to my dream job, which I'm very grateful for.
Mhm. Now, as a publicist, you work in various genres, you were saying. It's not
Yes.
just YA or romance. You'll do nonfiction and
Yeah. I was Cher's publicist, which is pretty cool. Yeah, so I work for William Morrow, which is a department of HarperCollins. And William Morrow in particular is a very unique imprint because they do truly publish a little bit of everything. We do William Morrow, which is like thriller and general fiction. We do Mariner, which is literary fiction. Avon is romance. Day Street is celebrity. Harvest is cookbooks and lifestyle. Voyager is fantasy and sci-fi. Harper Teen. So we do a little bit of everything, which I find very, very exciting because in any given year, I usually have about 16 or 17 assignments, and they're like, I'm looking at my assignment grid right now, and it's thrillers and romance and nonfiction and full literary fiction and like another thriller and like a huge romance. And one of them working on is like the making of a really popular Netflix movie, like a coffee table book. So it's really, really cool that I get to do like a little bit of everything, and I find it really enjoyable, and it keeps your skills sharp to not be pushing the same types of books every time.
yeah. Now, as a writer, will we ever see you write a like thriller or a nonfiction or a cookbook? Like, will you ever
Um,
deviate from romance, the genre?
I don't plan on it. I like to say my next big goal is I want to write a Hallmark Christmas movie screenplay. I don't know how to write screenplays, to be clear. That would be something I'd have to tackle first. But that's something that I would really enjoy. I definitely would want to stay in the romance space, but my dad was a detective for 25 years, and I feel like he's got some pretty interesting stories that could make an interesting mystery, maybe
Yeah.
one day. But no, for me, my heart lies with romance right now, and I do think that's where it will stay.
Well, T Tessa Bailey has a detective rom-com one, so you
I'm the
can match
publicist
it.
on that one. So yes, I know.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, there you
Tessa's
go.
amazing. Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yes. And she's doing she's doing a time travel romance now kind of thing. So it's like you can blend romance with things that were not traditionally romance in the past. So if I did deviate, I think it would be something like that. Where it's
Yeah.
like there's still romance at its core, but maybe something a little bit different.
Yeah. Now, how do you go about crafting your novels? Kind of going back to your writing process, do you start, you mentioned having the idea of writing like we've hit turbulence on a napkin, but
Hmm.
and then you did the scene with the cliff jumping, but do you do an outline? Like take us through like that whole process.
Oh, do I do an outline? Hang on. I wonder if I can show you this on the camera. Do I do an outline? Yes. Yes, I am very much the sticky note, index card, write every scene. I color code the post-its so they have to do like a certain color is like the character's conflict with themselves or their conflict with their love interest or their antagonist. So I can kind of see it laid out and see if like one part of the book is too heavily focusing on one plot and I have to weave in. I'm very tactile with my planning. I'm very visual, so I'll do the sticky notes. I'll do it with index cards, but I need to have every single scene meticulously outlined before I start drafting. My friends all make fun of me for it, because I'm very much not, they like to say people are either plotters or pantsers. I am so far on the plotting side, like I'm a super plotter. For me, that's the way I think. I think by the time my outline that I send to my agents is usually 20 pages. By the time I start writing the first words in the Microsoft Word doc, the book in its entirety is pretty much done via outline. Um, I like that. I know a lot of people don't like that, and I understand. But for me, I like having the rigid outline because I like knowing if I deviate a little bit. So when I was writing and Delia started to show up a little bit more, and I realized I wanted to do more with her, I felt the freedom to throw in an extra scene because I knew my next scene. Like I still had the roadmap. I saw the light at the end of the tunnel. I had checkpoints that I knew I had to hit. So I could veer off the path a little bit because I knew how to find my way back. So for me, I find that very, very reassuring. So I am very much a meticulous outliner.
Yeah. Now you were talking about like all the rewriting it. Do you go back to the outline first when you have to, do the different timelines, or do
Yes.
you
I
okay.
do. So that board I just showed you is actually it's not for We Fit Turbulence, it's for the rom-com conundrum. And that is the board from the first draft. And I'm in the middle of revisions and there's several big, without spoiling, there's like several scenes I have to add to make certain things make sense. So that is my old outline and I have a new color of post-it that's like new scenes to add. And I'm able to slot it in like I need this scene. I'm gonna put it between this scene and this scene. And like it's kind of like I'll add to it and build on it. No, it is there.
Um, Now you mentioned using Word. Have you ever used like Scrivener, or is there anything else, or do you just recommend Word?
You know, it's
I use
funny.
Word.
I got into it, I wouldn't say an argument, a debate with one of my writing friends yesterday because they're trying to make me use Scrivener. And I said, you can pry Word from my cold dead hands. I'm not leaving. So no, I pretty much do write exclusively in Word, which my friends all think I'm crazy for because they all use Scrivener and people find it very helpful. But I'm very much a creature of habit. And the thought of like having to learn a new system at this current moment, I'm like, I can't do that right now. No, thank you. So I'm very much Word, but my friends have been trying to get me on the Scrivener train for quite some time.
Yeah. Yeah, we had this discussion. I was like, I'd have to watch YouTube on it and see,
It's too
like all the
much. I
different.
can't. I like my little Word doc. Just fine that way.
Now, do you have any craft books you recommend, Jessica, to writers?
Yes, I actually found Story Genius by Lisa Cron really helpful. Cron. That's one that we had to read in one of my thesis classes in my MFA, and it's very much it focuses like on writing as a whole, but there's a emphasis on storyboarding, which is what I do. So I actually did not storyboard until I read that book. And then for one of my assignments, my thesis novel, I was like, let me just give it a try. And I fell in love with it, and now I can't outline any book any other way. So I found the book of Story Genius. I found that very helpful. And then not all of Save the Cat, because I don't read it all, but the Save the Cat beat sheet of all the beats you need to hit, I have pinned up next to my desk, and before any outline, that's where I start. I flesh it out more scene by scene as I go along, but the Save the Cat beat sheet is where I begin every idea. Like I took that cocktail napkin and that was the first thing I put of like, this is the main crux of the argument. This is going to be the opening image. Like I did like kind of like a translating it to the beat sheet first before I really fleshed out my outline.
Mhm. Now, take us through like the process of that, Jessica. Do you do like that beat outline before, like, do you do the character outline? Do you kind of do it all together and see how it kind of fits in?
I start with the beat outline and it's very, very broad strokes. So I'll do, most of the time I don't even know these characters' names at this point. So I'll put like female main character is sitting next to male main character on the plane. They have to have some sort of tension. Like that's what I write. Like it's not very fleshed out. Like that's the very, very opening. So I'll do very broad strokes. They have some type of tension. They land in Hawaii. Spoiler stuff I won't say. This is how the book needs to end. And then I'll look at that and now I'm like, well, now I need to assign actual people to this. Like, this is just like, they're just vague blobs in my head. And then I'll start doing the character sketches. And as I'm doing those and I'm learning more about the characters, like when I was doing the character sketch, Olive was somebody who was like, she has to be very rigid in her life plans. And then I got an idea for a scene where I could make that clear. So I would go back to the beat sheet and be like, well, here's a scene I'm going to add in to make that part of her character make sense. And it kind of just like building blocks that way and kind of spirals. It usually takes me about 2 weeks to fully flesh out the outline before I feel like I have like a really, really good bones to start with.
Mhm. Now, what if you get stuck, like on a scene? Do you go out for a walk? Or like, what do you recommend writers do if they're like, oh,
Um,
I just can't figure it out?
so when I get stuck, sometimes yes, I'll go for a walk. I'll sometimes like take a day off. It's okay. I feel like hustle culture has taught us it's not okay. There was a day that I was like trying to work on revisions for the rom-com conundrum, and I was just getting so stuck and I was wasting so much time by stressing about it that I was like, I'm just gonna do this tomorrow. Like, it's gonna go for a walk, gonna go out to dinner with my friends. Like, this is a problem for tomorrow. And instead of stressing and forcing myself to get through it, I gave myself the break. And then the next day I felt a lot more refreshed and ready to tackle the problem. Another thing that I really find helpful, which a lot of writers don't like, is I will write out of order because I have my outline that doesn't stress me out because I know like I wrote the cliff jumping scene, but I knew exactly where it was going to slot in. So it's not I could just like have it in a different file, and when we got to that point, I could just drop it in. So for me, when I started writing We've Had Turbulence, I was writing the beginning and I was feeling a little stuck because it's a lot to accomplish while they're sitting next to each other on a plane. And then I was like, you know what, this cliff jumping scene, I can't get out of my head. I want to write that. So I just put down what I was doing and I worked on that. And the words were flowing because it was something I was excited about. So I actually finished the cliff jumping scene, put it away, and then I wrote the ending. I wrote the very last chapter. This was the second chapter I wrote in this book because it was something I was very, very excited to write. And I feel like if you chase what your brain is stuck on in that moment, I don't feel like I get stuck very often because I'm not forcing myself through a scene that I don't feel ready for. Um, and the last chapter, We've Had Turbulence, I don't think a single word has changed from that first draft. I think it's the only part of the book that has not been touched. Not at my own, not like me insisting that way. I think because I wrote something when I saw it so clearly and when the moment struck me, to me, it was one of the most perfect scenes in the book, like in structure and like editorial wise, because I wrote it when I felt excited for it, not when I felt like now it's Tuesday, I have to write the ending today. Like it was like, you know what, I'm gonna write the ending now because I feel like I'm excited for it. So I would say jump around, honestly. I would not be afraid to jump around if your brain is stuck on a different scene in the book.
Mhm. Now, what's your favorite part of the writing process? Do you like the developmental phase, the editing phase, the finished
I
phase?
I hate revisions, which is why I'm in a little bit of torture right now working on book two. If my editor sees this, I'm sorry, Allie. I hate revisions. I love the first drafts. I find it so freeing. I am very much team messy first draft. Just get the story out and you can clean it later. I'm currently in the later phase and I'm regretting that now. But I find it like I find the first draft so freeing because you can just get all the story out and it'll all make sense later, but just like get the story that's burning in your brain, get it out on the page. And I find that so freeing and so fun to just write like pages and pages and pages. I don't particularly love, revisions. There's a lot of rereading and tweaking a sentence here or there. Like I like being able to just sit and be like, da, 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 and like write for hours. So I definitely enjoy the first draft.
Yeah. Now, before we take audience questions, what was the process like in getting an agent and like getting published? Can you walk us through that?
Yeah. So I actually got very lucky in the agenting process. So my MFA program, what they did when you graduated was they did like a round robin speed dating with a few agents. And it wasn't to get an agent, it was agents that volunteered for this program. It was just to practice like your elevator pitch and like how to pitch your book. So it was not meant for anybody to get a book deal. It was just more meant to get your feet wet a little bit. And so when you do actually do this in a professional capacity, you're prepared. And one of the professors in SNHU is also a literary agent. She was not my professor. I never had her. And so I did the pitch and she was like, I had actually mentioned in my pitch that I would love to be the Gen Z Sarah Dessen. Like that was like my goal. And she goes, that is crazy that you said that because if you check my Twitter, I tweeted yesterday that I'm looking for the next generation Sarah Dessen. Like that's what I wanted. So we kind of hit it off that way and we were talking pretty casually. And then after our 5 minutes were up, she was like, can you actually send me the manuscript when you're done? It was not We've Had Turbulence, it was a different book. But we just clicked right away. I got very lucky in that regard because I know traditionally you have to query and write a query letter and submit to agents, and that can be a very long road for people. So I definitely sympathize with that. But I get very lucky in that regard that it was just supposed to be a speed dating practice, and it just so happened the person I got paired with was looking for exactly the type of writer I wanted to be. So it was really exciting. And then from there, we submitted to the publishers, and that We've Had Turbulence was actually the book I wrote when my first book was on sub because I just needed something to do. And then I finished We've Had Turbulence. I actually wrote the first draft in 25 days. It was terrible. Terrible. Would not ever read that again. Um, but I finished the first draft and I was like, I actually kind of like this better than the novel that's on sub. I think we should pivot to this. And so that's what we did.
But the one on sub was romance
Yes, they're
or
all,
YA,
yeah,
yeah, from
it's
them.
it's
Yeah.
YA romance. It's shelved for now, but I've recently started like picking it up and looking at it again. And I'm like, maybe I can flesh this out a little bit. It wasn't its time back then, but maybe it'll be its time now. So we'll see.
Is there anything else you want to add, Jessica, before we let you go? Do you have any events coming up, website
Um,
where we can follow you?
I don't have any events right now. My website is justcozzywrites.com, so I could put it right here. But I'm on Instagram at just and Twitter at justcozzywrites. So I hope you guys enjoy the book if you do decide to read it, and I'm always around to chat. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much for joining, Jessica, and thank you to everyone who's watching and who was able to come. I hope you all have a great day.
Thank you guys for having me. Bye.